today is a good day to remember that Bet comes after Aleph, but only after Eliezer. And that is part of one of the underappreciated miracles of the modern world, which is to say, the resurrection of Hebrew as a spoken language. In a significant way, it goes back to October 13th of 1881, when a group of people got together and rather pointedly had the first conversation in Hebrew that anybody had held in about 1400 years. I did have the privilege of visiting Israel just over 10 years ago. And I picked up a very, very small amount, just a few phrases in Hebrew to help me navigate, like Od Cafe and Haver Shali Shalem, which I think means my friend will pay if I'm remembering it correctly. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, because the point here is not my linguistic virtuosity or lack of it. It's the amazing fact that if you go to Israel, people around you are speaking Hebrew. Anyway, well, of course they're speaking Hebrew, they're Jews, I mean, isn't that how that works? But it had really died out as a spoken language. Yiddish was the language of the Jewish communities in exile in Europe. And when the Zionists started trying to return to their homeland, to recreate Israel, a lot of them thought they had a lot more pressing problems than learning this alphabet, half of the letters in which seem to go at you, and which famously has no vowels but actually does. This could be a distraction from, farming the desert, not being killed by people who don't want you moving there. But there were people who were determined to revive the language as well. One of them was Eliezer Yitzhak Perlman, or perhaps I should call him Eliezer Ben Yehuda, as he called himself. He was the motive force behind that rather forced, pointed, casual conversation in Hebrew. His son was the first native Hebrew-speaking child in many centuries. And a darn lonely kid, I might add, because of course nobody else spoke Hebrew. Who was he supposed to play with? But they were absolutely determined that they were going to revive the language, and they would bake cakes for other families that swore that they too would only speak Hebrew. They didn't use up a lot of flour in the process, I can tell you that. And the ultra-Orthodox were against this project because they didn't think that Hebrew should be a secular language. Nevertheless, they did do it. And looking back, it's easy to take it for granted, but it's one more amazing thing about the story of Israel that was possible to do this. I should mention that Ben Yehuda's son was an ardent Zionist. He was also an enthusiast for Esperanto. And you're not going to find people having conversations in Esperanto anywhere other than Esperanto clubs saying, no, really, it's a good idea. But when we were in Israel, and of course Israel is forever having immigrants coming in, making aliyah from places where Hebrew is not spoken, and many of them don't speak a word of it when they arrive. The country has a very relaxed attitude toward language. But in a few instances, we found ourselves so far off the beaten track in some backwoods gas station that they only spoke Hebrew. And that's an amazing thing, considering that Israel only came into existence in 1948. That if you get someone who really doesn't have a lot of language background there, you're not going to find them speaking only some European language or from some other part of the world. You're going to find them speaking only Hebrew. You couldn't do this with a Syrian. And as my friend John Patrick has rather pointedly said, if Canadians were dispersed for 1800 years, you couldn't regather them on the basis of the Charter of Rights and have us saying a and took to one another again. There is something different about Israel, something that commands our attention, from the extraordinarily virulent, persistent, and vicious nature of anti-Semitism to the extraordinary vitality of the community, including being able to take a language that nobody had spoken in 1400 years, somehow manage to have a conversation in it, raise your kid as, king of the dorks, my kid only speaks Hebrew, and see within 100 years a dynamic, vibrant nation taking its place on the world stage in which Hebrew is the language of everyday speech. It's easy to take for granted because we know what happened, but it actually is something pretty close to a miracle, and an inspiring one at that. If you're enjoying these commentaries, please visit my website. That's johnrobson.ca. It helps support my documentaries, my writing, my commentary. And keep watching The Rebel. If you're not already a subscriber, please do subscribe.